My dad spent over 20 years as an officer with the Cambridge, Massachusetts Police Department, and he told me about the tunnels that run under the city. There are a few different names for them: the Harvard tunnels, the Cambridge Catacombs, and the Crimson Catacombs. They're a well-kept secret shrouded in mystery. Mention them, and most people assume you're talking about the subway tunnels and will show little to no interest. Discovered by settler James Elliott Smith in 1634 and later bought by Harvard when Smith disappeared in 1641. Nobody knows who built them, or why. They have spawned many legends over the centuries. In 1775, a British soldier abandoned his outfit during the siege of Boston, made his way into Cambridge, and hid in the tunnels. Less than a day later, he emerged, wide-eyed, babbling about a Latin-speaking child with charred black feet who taunted him until he fled. In 1827, Edgar Allan Poe ventured down there while stationed in Boston and wrote of a pale child who materialized out of black fog and changed form in front of my very eyes, despite few people knowing about their existence, and technically being off limits to the public. People still occasionally find an access point. The most frequently used entrance lies in the basement of the Memorial Hall, a high Victorian Gothic theater at the north end of Harvard Yard. In 1991, a 4-year-old girl went missing from her home back in the middle of the night. There were no signs of a break-in, and her bedroom windows remained closed and locked. Her body was discovered a week later, deep inside the catacombs, with not a mark on her or any other evidence of foul play. The two teenage explorers who found her say that they initially thought she was alive as her body was standing perfectly erect against the wall. Since then, it's standard procedure to search the tunnels in the event of a missing persons case. My dad has been brought down there 3 times. The first was in 1997. A young boy had gone missing after leaving his grandmother's house, and a massive search effort was underway. My dad entered the tunnel with 3 other officers, and they walked the entire 6 miles of it with no sign of the boy. Shortly after exiting empty-handed, they were radioed that, tragically, the body of the child was discovered in the river in Maine, and suspects were in custody. The second time was just a year later. An 80-year-old man with dementia wandered away from his daughter's apartment, and my dad was again assigned to the catacomb search. The team hadn't gotten more than a half a mile in where they were told to come back. The man had been found, perfectly lucid, enjoying a scoop of ice cream at the Ben & Jerry's in Harvard Square, a bit peeved that his afternoon jaunt had been deemed a demented walkabout. The third time, he doesn't like to talk about. It began much like the other 2, missing person. In this case, a 4-year-old girl, Alicia Hughes, last seen playing in her backyard. As usual, Dad was one of the 4 who drew up the short straw and had to go check the tunnels. No, he hadn't yet had a disturbing experience down there, but nobody is going to end up a volunteer to walk through a dark, creepy, damp tunnel of unknown origin and questionable stability. Since his other 2 experiences had been uneventful, Dad took the opportunity to study the structure. Shining his flashlight on the walls, he couldn't see that they were composed entirely of dirt, as he had initially thought. There was a thick layer of clay that was eroding in spots, revealing light, very old-looking orange bricks underneath. While it didn't dispel his unease entirely, the realization that the tunnel was structurally sound that he had thought lifted a bit of weight off his shoulders. He noticed the lack of graffiti on the walls. You'd think there would have been a plethora, but no. Not a single tag. The place would have made a great hangout spot for adventurous youths, homeless, and drug addicts alike, but there was no trash, no needles, nothing. Almost as if people didn't want to stay there very long. Dad shone his flashlight on the darkness in front of him, ready to resume his duty, and startled when the beam failed to illuminate the 3 other officers who had been in front of him not 30 seconds before. Had they fallen behind him when he was preoccupied with the construction of the place? He whipped around, but the flashlight illuminated a tunnel of nothingness. He stopped in place, thinking maybe if he quieted his boots he'd be able to hear theirs. Or maybe their voices, far up ahead or around a corner, where his flashlight couldn't reach. Silence. He tried his radio, nothing. Not surprising, coverage down there was very spotty. Just walk fast and you'll catch up to them, he told himself, quickening his pace. Then a tiny voice echoed through the blackness. Hello? It asked. It was a little girl. Hello? He parroted, breaking into a jog. Help! Alicia Hughes? Is that you? I want to go home. Keep talking to me, Alicia, so I can find you, okay, honey? He jogged for another minute or so, swinging his flashlight every which way and slowed to catch his breath when it illuminated a small figure, huddled against the brick wall where the tunnel dead ends. It was a tiny girl with a flame-red hair. His first instinct was to radio that he'd found her, but it occurred to him that there was no reception like before. He most certainly wouldn't at the deepest end of the maze. Hi, is your name Alicia? He asked the frightened girl softly in his best soothing dad voice. Yes? She stood on shaky legs, popping her head against the wall to push herself up. My name is Officer Reynolds, but you can call me Dan, okay? Are you hurt in any way, sweetie? No. That's good. Do you want to hold my hand so we can get out of here? She slipped her little hand into his and he gave it a gentle, reassuring squeeze. I want Mommy, she said tearfully. You're gonna see Mommy very soon, okay, honey? Okay. They walked as quickly as Alicia's little legs could carry her, with Dad trying his radio over several hundred feet, wanting to communicate with his team as soon as they got within range. They were about 50 feet from the rotted wood staircase that would lead them to the entrance when his radio cracked to life, finally. It was garbled, but he could make out important words. Dad shook his head. Certainly he'd misheard, and asked them if they could repeat themselves. They reiterated that Alicia had been found, shoeless and wandering along the sidewalk near the grandmother's house in Somerville. They were positive it was her, and her parents had just arrived unseen and confirmed it. So if Alicia was at her grandmother's house, whose hand was my father holding? His mind was suddenly inundated with the legend of the tunnels. Little girl, black feet, ghosts, shapeshifters, demonic activity. His stomach felt like it dropped into his colon. Extremities went cold and a tingling began on the roof of his mouth, like the prelude to a panic attack. So this was it, he thought to himself. This was how he was going to die, or worse, he was going to be dragged to hell. He'd been too cocky about the tunnels and hadn't taken the story seriously. He'd been lured in by an innocent little girl, and now he was literally in his grasp, holding his hand. He didn't dare look it in the face, afraid that it would change into something evil in front of his very eyes. So he did what any burly adult male police officer would do. He snatched his hand out of his grasp and hightailed it out of those tunnels, not looking back, not even if its sad little voice called after him. He wasn't falling for that shit again. Dad had nightmares for weeks and was so shaken up by what he encountered that he informed his boss that he would never return to the tunnels, even if it meant his job. Surprisingly, his boss was sympathetic and told him there were several rookies he'd send down the next time that tunnel search was required. They needed the experience, after all. 2 months later, just as my father was beginning to forget his experience, Alicia Hughes was once again reported missing. A welfare check on her family, requested by a neighbor, revealed that her parents had been murdered in their bed, their throats slit, and their daughter nowhere to be found. On their nightstand sat a torn corner of construction paper. On it, scrawled in green crayon, was a message. Thank you for letting me out. Upon learning of this turn of events, my father did something he swore he'd never do. He returned to the tunnels. He had a hunch that he hoped to God wasn't true. He and 2 other officers walked nearly all 6 miles before they found the flame-haired body of Alicia Hughes. Her little form was curled up in the fetal position on the dirt floor, as though she had died trying to keep herself warm. She was in the process of mummifying. The soil surrounding her was dark, as it acted like a sponge for the fluids of her body had leached, allowing her to dry out. An autopsy revealed that she had been dead for approximately 2 months. My father never recovering from this and retired from the police force the following year.